Dropped just a bit.
All right. Good evening. How are you doing tonight?
Doing fantastic.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Super.
So we've got a special guest here tonight with us. In addition to myself, Kevin, and Mikey, we have Kimo. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right. So, Kevin, I think you invited him on, correct? What did you want to talk about?
I did. Oh, yeah. So, Kimo and I are in a group chat where we discuss some CCR drama and stuff related to CCR and Fullerton's part in dechartering and stuff like that. So we had some disagreements over what actually happened and what's currently happening. So I'd like to talk to Kimo about that. Hopefully you, Ryan, and Mikey can join in and give your side of the story.
All right.
All right,
that sounds good.
One moment, gentlemen. Let me just walk into my home. I just got home. I'll be on the call in 2 minutes.
All right.
All right.
Fantastic.
By the way, I'm recording.
What was that?
I can hear him galloping up the stairs.
Well, that's good.
All right, gentlemen. Do you have any questions for me?
Kevin, did you hear?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So, I think we had a few disagreements about what Fullerton's actual complaints were with CCR, and
Sure.
why we dechartered and what we currently think of CCR. So I want to know.
Clarify your perspective.
What is your take on what? I'm sorry.
So what's my take on what happened with Fullerton?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly there were what it came from Amanda, especially from what she both verbally told me and from the post that happened, is she was upset with the drama, which drama is a vague term. I would surmise that meant an exchange of comments between her and other state board members, or that occurred at election, and she felt that somehow functioned to undermine her club.
Okay.
Would you say that's an accurate portrayal?
Well, I can't say what Amanda herself said. I can tell you my personal view on CCR and why we should have decharted and why I agree with us dechartering. And
okay,
why,
perfect. So what's... All right,
well,
so would you like me to start out with some reasons not to, or?
I'm sorry?
Would you like me to start out with some reasons not to, or how
Sure.
would you prefer to facilitate this conversation?
You can go ahead with the reasons.
All right, so a couple good reasons to be part of CCR. The first one happens to be that CCR provides state materials, it provides funding for socials, it provides access to other clubs that is otherwise not available. And you have to remember the original purpose and intent of CCR, really what it should be. The purpose of CCR is not necessarily decentralized state organization. The original purpose of CCR is to empower the regions into a central connection. That provides access to a large amount of information. So you have these two primary benefits. It's, so to say in legal terminology, bifurcated, which basically means it's in two sections. The first one being access to resources, the second one being access to information and the facilitation of discourse. I would even go off to gander that competitive elections, what people colloquially call drama, is actually beneficial. Because yes, it causes immediate drama amongst the head people. I don't know, maybe it blackpills a few top CCR members. But what it does accomplish is it accomplishes people being able to have a statewide discussion on the way politics is going. And to understand politics as simply an exchange of policies, i.e., oh, we should fund this appropriation measure should be taken, is a great misunderstanding of what politics is. Politics is much more of a social exchange. I would go as far to say as memes, to some extent, depending on the different accesses to them, represent a form of verbalized communication. It represents a form of, in some ways, propaganda. It represents a form of, artistic intent. So things like that, even when it is supposedly covered by this mask of drama, works healthy. Let me make a comparison of this. Imagine the free market. CCR is very much like the free market, right? You have a multitude of ideas, a multitude of management perspectives, a multitude of individuals, all with different temperaments. Ultimately, everyone has an equal vote. Those votes cast represent something similar to the marketplace of ideas. The most effective ones eventually, over an extended period of time, win out. So it creates a more effective organization that is propelling ideas that are popular with the electorate. So I think those can be applied to activism ideas too. It can be applied to, statewide measures on media. It can be applied to statewide measures on party access. It can be applied to a multitude of things. It's the same reason why we have a state GOP in time. So right now, for instance, obviously CCR is not involved directly in access to activism right now. And I would gander, just based on the climate of CCR, that it probably won't be until the next administration. The reason is right now it's focused on party things. Deployments, we do a ton of deployments. We're doing a deployment on Saturday. We're doing a deployment after that, the triple deployment in Central Valley. We're doing a deployment in the Central Coast. There's probably going to be Bay Area deployments. I know there's northern deployments. There's San Diego deployments. We're going to probably do a Young Kim deployment, already talking to them on that. And kind of the grouping of these resources allow a lot of walkers in one place to help get people elected. So, that's another reason. Even if you don't think CCR is useful to chapters, it's useful to helping get Republicans elected and getting that youth voice out there. It's a concentration of effort because regions divided can't stand. They can't represent something to the party that is meaningful. When they come together, when they're able to group their resources, even though collectivism as a coerced measure is evil, which is why I'd be against coercing people to charter, when people come together and willingly group their resources, they can do something more effective. It's the most basic primal function of the organizational structure since the beginning of time.
Okay. Do you think that the size of California and the number of colleges contained within it and the resources that CCR has at its disposal, do you think that it is effective at covering the entire state and taking care of the diverse needs of all the different colleges?
At a regional perspective, absolutely. The regional vice chairs at every level are rather effective at facilitating deployments, which is what has been most useful as of recently because we're in an election season. Afterwards, when it comes to activism, I think they're very important in helping protect colleges. A lot of colleges, especially those who are less, well accessed to the system, have to rely on their regional vice chairs to help start them. I'll give you a perfect example. I talked to this great girl. Her name is Elizabeth. She's starting at Golden West College, starting a great chapter there. That happened because Panayiotis Strusiakis, he's the vice chair of the region, went to the school and started a chapter there. We just saw that tonight. I just got off the line with people from Concordia. We're going to go work with their YAF and get them involved there. Regional vice chairs are the way we have this official capacity to function in a region. I agree. I think just a state organization, free of any sort of regional vice chairs, is inefficient. And the reason is any large centralized organization, as large as the state of California, is inefficient. But when the grouping of resources is properly appropriated to regional vice chairs, I think we gain efficiency. Efficiency is different in different places. I would say in times of elections, it's more important to centralize the appropriation of resources so we can do things like get hotel rooms, get activism events out for specific candidates, do deployments, things like that. Now, in saying off years, we need to look at the budget and rewrite appropriation measures so that we can better help individual chapters rather than have these, massive single events. So regardless, I believe that the organization is better united than divided.
Okay.
Because remember,
is there
part
no
of the state
reason
organization
why
is not just make
an uncharted club
continue.
cannot work? Is there a reason why an uncharted club cannot work together with a group of other CCR chapters? I know that
Perfect.
the regional vice chair does have a stake.
That's a perfectly good question. So, a couple responses to that. First off, they absolutely can. An unchartered chapter, especially if you're just talking about local affairs, absolutely they can work with them. Some of them will work together, some of them won't. You will note that charter chapters pay a total of 0 in dues. A charter chapter pays a total of 0 into the organization. All it gains is access. My argument is that in times of deployments and times of elections where we need to concentrate CCR resources in specified elections around different parts of the state, that the state organization is efficient in facilitating that. Secondly, while it is true an unchartered chapter can, go about and do their own thing, they absolutely can. They can even work with chartered groups. The problem with an unchartered chapter is they have no way of accessing resources to help new starting groups. And they have no reason to. Why would Fullerton, for instance, appropriate resources to Golden West?
What type of resources are you talking about?
Now, they could do that, but I'm saying, strictly looking at this from a marketing standpoint, if you look at it kind of like an international relations theorist would on realism, they have no purpose to. They have no control over those chapters, no stated organization. And if they did, at some point, they would just become like CCR. So at one point or another, we're looking at the grouping, the collectivization of these resources.
So, question, Kimo. You're saying that the state organization has access to resources, let's say let's say unchartered clubs would not have access to. But it seems like in your example, when it comes to the deployments and stuff like that, that's just people. And unchartered organizations can volunteer people, at whim, with no cost to the club nor cost to the state organization in itself. People just have to show. So, what other resources would you then be talking about?
So, a couple answers to that. The first one is the primary warrant I'm giving is communications between regions. Yeah, you can have that. But, for instance, if there was no state organization, your unchartered chapter isn't going to be able to come into access with somebody from Central Valley to figure out how to help their candidates. And ultimately, there's some sort of notion that we should be in a collective effort to elect Republicans. So maybe on directly local issues that's true, but it's much less efficient from a holistic standpoint of getting people elected. And even then, people who are kind of nearby, such as, Diane Harkey, there's going to be significantly less access to people who are just a tiny bit out of their way there than if you had a state organization.
Well,
so you have
when
your
it comes
communication
to let's say with the state organization.
Other resources. Allow me to finish.
If you don't mind me asking this question, is when it comes to your holistic approach, hasn't much of the conflict of CCR been geographical, in a sense? Much of, let's say, what the leadership of the organization is now, more or less comes from the South, while much of what opposes this leadership comes from the North. And when, let's say, when the slate that was elected that got this current leadership into governance and into responsibility was the North, and it was the South. So in a sense, it seems like the North and the South, as let's say other local communities, have differences on where the organization wants to go. Wouldn't it be better if those local regions more or less had a little more autonomy?
No, I actually think their competition, their ideological competition, is good. It's healthy. Trying to create an organization that avoids conflict, getting rid of elections, not having the ability to directly access a centralized way to adjudicate problems is bad, because ultimately elections, even when elections cause conflict, are good because the democratic process creates more efficiency. I would also like to point out that there are plenty of people on State Board that are not from the South. You have Sarah Moorcott, for instance. She comes from all the way in the North. She ran on the prior slate. You have Matt Renau. He ran on the prior slate as well, also from the North. You have people even from the Central California. You have Andrew Gates. You have Leslie Garcia. And from the North too, you have Rajiv Oak. You have John Rice Cameron. You have Christian Chacon from Central Valley. You have Christian Casillas. You have a very large number of people who are coming from Ryan Gardner, for instance. Floyd Johnson, all people coming from Northern California that actively take part in these policy discussions. Obviously, there are some people in the North who might have larger disagreements with people in the South. That's fine, but I think the democratic process is healthy for them facilitating their grievances. I think dividing them would be worse, because then you just divide their resources and then we don't get anyone elected or we don't get any help. Now, I'm not saying your unchartered organizations can't do good things. I'm sure Fullerton does. I'm just saying it's easier to access each other when you have a central forum. Think of the state organization, especially during times of, off season, so there's no election going, functions as a forum. It's a bunch of CRs talking to each other. So I think in that manner it's effective. But let's go back, perhaps. I feel like I somewhat avoided the question on resources you guys have, or you want me to give a clear answer just on, listing stuff we provide.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's because I did ask that question because much of at least the examples prior were more or less of just donating or having volunteer people on the ground as, let's say, a resource, when unchartered chapters can do that pretty much at their own whim.
Right. So I'll give an example. The state gives specific stipends to every region. We're hoping eventually in the future to provide, $1,000 yearly stipend to regions to hold regional socials. That's a good chunk of money when it comes down to it for a lot of these chapters. We have, state chapter boxes that come out to people. Most recently, we gave supplies out. So there's tangible resources like that get applied and, sent out to people and things like that. We also pay for a lot of the stuff at state conventions. At the CAGOP conventions, we get rooms there. And a lot of that's paid for, and it helps facilitate conversations between CRs they wouldn't be able to have otherwise because they wouldn't have the money. So, practical resources like that. And I want to, ideally in the future, probably after election season, obviously, because right now the focus needs to be on electing Republicans. But a future administration really needs to focus on, having specific, tangible things they can point out to people and what they're giving. In the future, perhaps, I've heard this idea swung around but never practically implicated. We need to do something like build a wall that is easily transportable to each campus that the state org owns, and people can do activism events off it. That's a specific, tangible resource. But I think these improvements need to happen through the democratic process. And I think the disagreements, as long as they're portrayed in a civil manner, are healthy at the end of the day.
Well, anyone would
Perhaps
take that?
Let me give you, one last one.
The civil manner I can get to later, and maybe that's much of my personal issues when it comes to CCR as an organization. But I mean, I can shelf that aside for, let's say, if any of the two other co-hosts say have any want to kind of follow through on that, at least what has recently been discussed.
Maybe I can give one last benefit. One last tangible one. Representation in the CRNC. D-Charter chapters has zero representation. The problem is the CRNC, in my opinion, is completely out of control right now. And they have the big bucks. Their chair is paid $100,000 every year. Just the chair, not including the executive director, who's also paid something similar, not including the co-chair, also paid something. All these people are paid ridiculous amounts of money, and that should go into national chapter boxes. And those should be able to be sent out to a large group of CRs. And we can do another round of those if we just, took very minuscule cuts from all the staff on board, which honestly, they're losing the TPUSA. They're losing their activism. So the state organization is a way to make your voice heard on a national scale when you elect your chairman every year. So I find that to be important, and perhaps right now an underutilized resource that needs to change. And I hope, for instance, I'm going to be the representative in the upcoming BOD, meeting at Las Vegas with the CRNC. I'm going to make my voice heard. It's going to be very clear, my policy, that Chandler and the CRNC are out of control in their spending, and it needs to be curbed.
So, in your opinion, what should the CRNC be doing if they weren't paying these exorbitant salaries?
Way more chapter boxes. All of us quite enjoy. I believe even Fullerton received a chapter box from the CRNC. We could use more of that stuff. That needs to come out. The CRNC needs to publish. At the end of the day, they need to grow some balls and publish a platform. The TPUSA does it. Other people are speaking out. They're replacing the CRNC and replacing that college Republican voice. So they need to do that. They need to get on top of that. If you go to the CRNC website right now, it doesn't really have anything on it. They need to show they're an active and effective organization. When they do these annual BOD meetings, there needs to be clear business. They need to be filmed. And, at the end of the day, if there's a little drama, that's fine because it shows people are getting work done. In my opinion, if there's a healthy amount of drama, political discourse going into the creation of appropriation bills, then it shows, especially at a grassroots organization like CRNC, that people care and they're doing things. So CRNC needs to do more stuff like that. I think the CRNC should also bring major speakers on every different state they tour at their conventions and invite a multitude of CRs to attend them. These things can be, big attractions to CRNC. They don't just have to be business. But the CRNC has the money to do this. They're just not right now. And honestly, outside of, media campaigns none of us really see, the CRNC isn't doing much for college Republicans. So the appropriation of funds from them could be going many other places.
Okay. And where do they get their money from?
CRNC gets it from donors. They have a large number of donor groups. They have passive income. One of the problems we have is that they won't release the full financial statements, which makes some of us suspicious. But I intend at the BOD session to definitely move for them to release their financial forms, at least in the amount of money we have, to our constituents, because we have a right to know that stuff. They're saying, the Democrats are going to make a field day. The only reason Democrats would make a field day out of it is, one, if we have like $1 billion from ExxonMobil or something, but honestly, the Democrats aren't going to attack an organization that's largely irrelevant right now. And B, it'd be if we have nothing. And if we have nothing, then we have a much bigger problem than if the Democrats are attacking us. We have a problem that we need to fix the organization and the fact that we're going to run in the red soon because we owe these people money. So financial transparency is far more important than some stupid Democrats on social media complaining, in my opinion.
Well, if I may assert this, I think we're kind of getting off track here. If you don't mind, if my co-hosts don't mind, just because we're talking about the CRNC, which is a national organization, we're talking about TPUSA, which is a national organization. We're talking about outreach without, out of the state. When, if you don't mind me, at least trying to redirect it back to the statewide organization of CCR.
No problem.
And with the question, at least with something you propose now, because I believe you said this at least 3 times about how drama, let's say the influence of drama creates a healthy discourse within, let's say, a democratic, more or less, system.
I said it can. It doesn't always.
And comparatively, at least looking on the outside, which would probably be my standpoint, maybe comparatively between my 2 other co-hosts, that the drama, at least of CCR, I would assume, or at least from some perspectives, could be, well, very negative. And it seems like what should have been resolved at the convention, not too long ago this year, it's still going on. I was wondering, how would you want to describe that? As let's say that you're part of the leadership that
it's the normal. So obviously, I don't agree with a lot of what's being said, I disagree with a ton of it, actually. I think some of it that's being sent out against us is sent out against multiple people, even from those within the state organization, is really visceral. It's not conducive. At the same time, it's kind of business as usual. Let me give you a couple examples. There's been drama in CCR since prior to Ariana taking share. We had Ivy Allen, when she got rid of people from the advanced slate, and they got angry, and they were complaining on social media. But really, we are also facing the consequence of an era when it is super easy to personally grieve. It is super easy to access a device to forward your immediate emotional grievances to everybody. In the past, when Facebook was less prevalent, when you had to use email, you really had to more think out your grievances. So people weren't just like flipping each other off on social media. Things are changing now. We see that in actually the state party for real Republicans too. There's already talks about Travis Allen running for chair. People are attacking Brolte. People are calling him names on social media. You had the Travis Allen Cox drama that went on, probably the most divisive drama in the state organization, far more than anything that happened at the CCR level. So I think it's business as usual. Drama will always be inherent to politics because politics is a social device. And when there's a social device inherent to something, people need to dramatize it, especially those who are not in power. When you're not in power and you want change, you need to create discontent. And the way to create discontent is to cause petty drama, gossip. He slept with her, things like that. That creates the environment.
Before I hand this off to another co-host, could I say, or may I ask, is there anything on, let's say, because if I quote you right, you said that there's many things that you disagree with that have been hurled, accusations have been hurled at you. Now, or let's say at your side, and if you don't mind, this is not a pejorative in any sense. I would consider to say, as you're part of the leadership, I'll just reference you as the establishment, right? The established leadership of CCR. Would you disagree with some of the things, at least some of the things that have been come from your side of, let's say, the established against the discontent?
Yeah, so that's a complicated question. The reason that's a complicated question is it depends who you define on my side. If you mean strictly things the state org has said, not in people's personal opinions, I rather agree with what the state org has said. However, what CCR is more has devolved to, now I'm assuming we're not talking about the UCSD drama, because that's totally different. But outside of that, there's a lot of personal drama. And yeah, I don't like that getting involved. Honestly, my number one thing with personal drama, especially gossip drama. Recently, an individual went on a meme page and went on a rant about the state chairman. There shouldn't be any response to indignities like that. That's just an attack on character. The only response to that should be, we're focusing on making the state well. We're focusing on republicanism and these values. We need to stick away from the drama. Of course, I think part of the drama comes from the fact that a lot of people in the past on the centralized state board didn't have these strong Christian values to facilitate consistency. I actually I have in the past supported the state chairwoman. I don't support her in everything, but if you want like specific examples, we have disagreements on some moral issues. I have disagreements with a lot of people on state board. Not Ari, in fact. And Ari doesn't really put up much resistance to this, but I tried to put forward a piece of legislation saying that people should not be allowed within state board to sleep with each other. And, that didn't get passed. I wanted to include that into ethics. But these problems with professionality, that's what I think a lot of this is stemming from. So, yeah, I think some people on my side are flawed. I think there's some unprofessional behavior. But I think a lot of this stems from college kids being decadent and degenerates. And the way we solve that, put it frankly, strong Christian values. And if I can't, and I don't want to call indoctrinate, but if I can't give the dogma out to people, to focus on that. I want to codify it. So that's my take.
So you mentioned that what's going on with UCSD is a different matter. I don't know actually what your point of view is on that issue. Could you kind of explain to me from what you know what is actually going on with that?
Well, yes, I was the one to rule on that case, actually. Now, the thing with the UCSD case, I thought Michaela had a very strong, compelling case. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, she sends me this lengthy email saying the CCR system is corrupt. While she wants to be part of CCR, she doesn't want to go through the adjudication process. And then she issues a cease and desist statement, which if you read my case, I interpret it as, okay, she doesn't want to pursue this anymore. So she got ruled against because the defendant, if found innocent, according to Robert's rules, is restored all the previous rights. So the defendant won the case because the plaintiff didn't want to pursue it. That's Michaela's fault. It's entirely up to her fault on why this case went poorly. Why she decided to yell at the judicial board, the people trying to help adjudicate it, is beyond me. But you can go read the full case. Yes, I know when you initially click it, it says 104 pages, but it's really not that long. The majority of it is appendices, so I include evidence of everything that was said or asserted during the adjudication process. It's messy, but honestly, I would say at the end of the day, CCR was not able to really effectively rule on it because the plaintiff didn't want them to. The plaintiff wanted to excuse the case. In fact, it was so confusing, the judicial board noted it in their opinion that there seemed to have been merit when deciding if we wanted to dismiss the case with prejudice or not. Ultimately, we didn't dismiss the case with prejudice, which is very good for people at UCSD who still want to be part of CCR or that original chapter. But as of right now, the recognized chapter of UCSD, because of how due process works, is Drew Olbrandt's. He is the current president.
I guess more what I was asking about is how we got to two chapters at UCSD. I still don't really know.
Yeah, so CCR's perspective is that there is one chapter. The chapter was the defendant. How we had it before, it's a dispute over who is the legitimate executive board. There are a ton of random claims thrown out there on how they managed to get to that, but ultimately it made it that there was an amendment to the credentialing, made it all the way to the Credentials Committee, passed the Credentials Committee, and came into force. So how we got to there was something the judicial process should have got to, but never had the chance to. And I would love to hear how we would have got to that, but I really shouldn't comment too thoroughly on that because the case might come before judicial board in the future. But as I said before, I doubt it at this point, considering it's been months and McNally has basically already sent me a giant email saying I'm illegitimate. So we'll see where it goes. As I said, interpreting the law is the most important thing and giving people due process. So honestly, I don't know. I wish I did.
It seems like, at least from a layman's perspective, that the bureaucracy that you've described in this process created two chapters, in a sense.
No. So the first thing, there's not two chapters. There can only be one. The Constitution specifies that there cannot be two chapters. There is only one. Now, there might be a group of Republican people who don't want to be part of the official chapter and want to go make a YAF chapter or make it a chartered Republicans chapter. That's fine. They have every right to do that. It was not a bureaucratic thing. The bureaucratic thing just reacted to the split. It was an internal thing.
So
how, it was people...
Kimo, how old or when was the chapter at UCSB created?
Like the original formation or the one in the chartering document?
I'm asking according to CCR.
Well, let's go look at the case right now. We have it on the website. Let me just load it up. Because the original credentialing materials will tell us when they were last recognized. I'm not looking at it right now, and I'm trying to pull it up. But if I remember, they've been around for a while. But you have to remember, there's not a new chapter. The chapter's the same. The dispute was who is the legitimate executive board. So,
okay, and So
yes.
So CCR is capable of determining who the actual executive board is at a chartered organization.
No, the administration should be doing that, and they are right now.
Okay.
But what CCR can do is decide credentialing. So I obviously can't go to UC San Diego and shift up older credentialing materials from the perspective of the administration. I have no jurisdiction to do that. What I can rule on are credentialing grievances. What authority does that come from? Robert's Rules of Orders. And that authority has been around forever. What Roberts tells us is that we should decide, the body that decides the adjudication, usually the convention floor, in the case CCR, the judicial board, should decide which one is the legitimate credentialing delegate. So, I mean, the answer to that is kinda, if you think voting in CCR is what defines your executive board, then sure. But I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that definition.
Well, I'm only speaking based on what you have said, and as far as what you've said, the actual executive board lies with the people that were not previously the executive board, to my knowledge.
I mean, that's not the case they've made. So, obviously, yeah. I would love to hear the factual situation come out, but McNally never wanted to do that. She blatantly denied the due process system, and everyone has, even if you personally disagree with the system, everyone has a right to due process. McNally, if you go read the case, she openly said, cease and desist. I don't want any part of this. I don't want to be part of the CCR system. So her wish essentially was granted at the end of the day. But I will say the judicial board does have a right to decide credentialing matters. It's a technical matter. Why? Because we need to be able to decide who's the official delegates. That's always been the case. In fact, I would say it's gotten much better since the Lisa system, which would be the chair arbitrarily describing it. Now we have a strict due process system to help facilitate this matter so everybody gets treated equitably.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask you a hypothetical question. So if I was a member of an organization that is currently dechartered and I wanted to charter it again, what assurances could you make that this kind of a situation doesn't happen where there's weirdness with chartering materials being presented to, boards?
I mean, I would say, do you have a letter from your administration making your club official? If that's the case, then yeah, that couldn't happen. But okay. Both of them had letters from their administration saying they were official.
Okay.
So, for instance, if, let's say, okay, I'm just going to put a hypothetical. Let's say Chair A and Chair B both have letters from their administration saying they're signers on the organization and, have a right to sign documents on their behalf. And they are both able to present it to the Credentials Committee and both claim to be chair. Then yeah, this could happen again. I don't think that could happen in a chapter where the administration has a document on who's chair. And I think any administration website would show that. UC San Diego doesn't. They both claim it. And that's why they're in an adjudication trial process right now.
All right.
But usually the credentialing process is attempts to designate that by the administration's designation. Now, technically speaking, Robert's Rules asks us to look at the officially signed minutes that are signed by the secretary and chair at the last election. That gets complicated in organizations that don't have elections because they have no official documents showing who was passed off. But in organizations that have elections, there is a procedural way to figure this out if the administration can't. And we would have done that in McNally's case, but obviously she didn't want that. So I'd also say elect a chair who cares enough to go to the judicial board and file some documents. That might be something that's helpful. Because if you're not willing to comply with the system at all, if you just want to obstruct it, then yeah, the system's not going to help you much. And that's nothing against McNally personally. I'm just saying that's what happens.
Okay, me ask the question. So the original UCSD chapter, they were chartered, right? How can you acknowledge a new executive board if the original chapter was chartered?
Well, it's very normal for
forms on them.
It's very normal for chapters to update their credentialing material. The credentialing materials here was updated in late spring to show a new executive board. Most of organizations in the college Republicans do that because they elect new executive boards, and most people amend their details. There was no new charter; it was an amended charter.
Okay,
people had different.
So, and anyone could submit that.
Well, if you have a letter from admin saying you're a signer and you're an official, you have the ability in the organization to do that, then yeah.
What processes does CCR have to verify that it's an actual letter from a school?
It has to have an official, there's multiple processes. The first one is checking the original address, which we have a giant database that checks through it. The second one is Credentials Committee determines legitimacy. And the third one is that lying is an unethical violation. So if you're proven, let's say I forged a document from them, then you go to the judicial board and you say, this is a forged document. And then we'd say, okay, let's go contact their admin. We'd contact the admin and we get sorted out, and the person who violated it would be taken away their good standing, which is basically legal jargon for they get kicked out of the organization for fraud. It's unethical, and the bylaws specify that. So if you're asking what do I do if somebody does a crime, then I kick them out. That's what happens.
Now, if I may propose, so you said that there's three things, right? There's an address, there's an admin, and then there's a credentials board, right? This is the kind of the process the judge, let's say if a letter submitting that there is a new board of a chapter, at least of a chartered chapter, to be able to, so.
Right, obviously there's a confirmation
Let's just say that the
process.
address, let's just say that these things, I would say hypothetically, right? Just for this conversation.
Okay.
If there's these three things, right? These three. Say if the address works out, and let's say that you have an admin. So, one, before I continue, an admin as an administrator of the school, or an administrator within the chapter.
School.
Within the school. So.
Yes, they.
So like a person who, let's say, is in tandem with the chapter, or someone who is not affiliated with the chapter, because that seems.
I mean, I would assume a normal administrator is not affiliated with the chapter. It's somebody from like student life and leadership, or I don't know what your school's equivalent is, but it'd be a person authorized to give your club good standing.
Right, to save good club good standing, or members of your club good standing. Correct.
No, well, they only give signers. So signers are people who have legal authority. If we want to get really legalese here, you have an executive signer, which is really supposed to be the one. Some schools don't do that. Sadly, the case of UCSD, maybe that would have specified it, I don't know. But yes, they have signers. Most members are not signers.
Okay, most members are not signers, but let's say someone on the board, or on a board, right? Or so let's say on the board is a signer, right? So UCSD does not have a signer, or an executive signer. My bad, but they have signers, and then it goes to your committee. So let's say if these things follow through, right? The address is, so you have a database of addresses that verify. So with UCSD, there's probably a few, because you have a few signers, you probably have a few addresses. Now, are the addresses, and before I continue, are the addresses of the signers' homes, or addresses of the signers to the school, right? So the school address.
Well, what do you mean, like the email stuff, or like their physical? We have to have their physical as well, but
well, that's what I mean.
Yes,
well, if that's what you're judging off of, what you say their address, is it their home address, or is it the school's address?
What I meant by address was we need to see it came. So it could be two things. For one, it either needs to have like some sort of signature or confirming sign from the administration. or it needs to be, you know, an official school email address from the administrator. But yeah, it has to be from the administrator.
So the address is
from the school.
Okay. So you have the address that goes to the school, but everyone knows the address to the school. So that's already easily confirmed. And then let's say if there's a signer,
it's like the email. I'm talking about the email. We check the email address came from the admin. So it'd be like
that's
Bob
fine.
something
this is
UCSB.
If I may continue,
I don't
this
know.
is where we're going to in the second, right? To an administrator of the school, right? Anyone from Student Life for Leadership or let's say what represents the body of student clubs on any campus, right? So now you have an administrator that's not affiliated, or let's say Student Life for Leadership, which the representative from that is not affiliated with the club, has no idea what's going on in the club, right? And let's say one person who is a signer from the club who has a disagreement, let's say with other members of that club, let's say other board members of that club, right, who also have, let's say, equitable signing powers, goes to the administrator of Student Life and Leadership, right, signs a document for that admin to pass on to let's say what would be the third check, right, the board. It seems like there's a lot of fault in this system here, and it seems to me.
Allow me to clarify. You forgot. So do you remember the second check? The second check, according to Robert's rules, and you can go look at the citations in my full opinion, has to do with minutes signed by the previous chair and secretary. Those minutes, which confirm the election, help us determine the official executive board. And then, of course, if you really want to get into the minutia, we would have, you know, witnesses come in to the minutes and stuff. But the minutes are really what we need. And
so the minutes of the previous CCR administration to a previous board.
Yeah, it would have to be signed by the prior chair, giving power to the new chair. So it'd be like the prior chair held the election, it was signed by the secretary, and then it got passed to the new chair. So it had to show they were lawfully elected.
When it comes, so the chair of the organization or the chair of the club?
The club.
Because I'm talking about the club. Okay, so
the prior chair of the club. So let's say there's chair A, B, and C. B and C have a dispute over who's actually the new chair. Chair A produces minutes showing Chair B was the legitimate chair. The judicial board would rule Chair B is the legitimate chair.
So probably what you left out in your explanation is that we have 2 minutes, right, of two previous chairs, or let's say 2 minutes from the same previous chair that somehow are supposed to coordinate between, or supposed to pass on to, let's say, chairs of, or two current chairs. And what I'm saying is, why would we have two documents of minutes? Were there two previous chairs? No, I'm trying to suggest is that one of those minutes, right? If that's what's confirmed, right? One of those minutes could have been forged, and that's why I was going into before we go on to the Roberts suggestion. What I'm saying is that we have it seems like a lot of your communication when it comes to your minutes and when it comes to communication from the club to the state organization is through Student Life and Leadership, through administrators that have no actually affiliation with the club and what the club thinks or what the club views to the statewide organization, right? That's not their job, and nor they really care.
No, their job is just to adjudicate. So
so that's not Student Life and Leadership. They're from your example, they're just passing on. They're pushing papers. They're pushing emails.
Not quite. So Student Life and Leadership also adjudicates conflicts that are filed. In the case of UCSB, McNally decided later, fully within her rights, to file a case against Dylan and Drew and them with the administration. So the administration will help adjudicate that case. CCR's job was to adjudicate credentialing processes. So, I mean, administration does a lot of that stuff.
I guess the question that I have is, did the credentialing committee have these minutes for the currently, the current board at UCSD as it exists, according to CCR?
Oh, they were submitted with McNally's petition, but she decided not to follow through with it.
So, okay, but the petition could only happen after the chartering committee had already decided what they thought, correct?
Well, so the credentialing committee
passed
the amendment as they did with everybody's amendments. They passed the amendment, and then when the conflict came up, they had to redecide. Robert's Rules of Order tells us that when in conflict between two credentialing materials, you pass it to the next relevant body, which is the Judicial Board. The Judicial Board has a due process procedure they have to follow. So yeah, it's submitted in the petition, but petitions don't mean much because the defendant has a right to question it. So the defendant, for instance, has a right to question the minutes. The defendant can make the argument that the minutes were forged or that the minutes were not legitimate. The defendant has the right to make all those arguments in front of the Judicial Board because it's their due process right. If I accuse you of something, you have a right to question me. Even if I present evidence against you, you still have the right to question that evidence. So, yes, that was presented, but McNally explicitly decided she did not want to comply with the system.
But it seems like, at least from some information, at least from what you said, and let's say surrounding information, that there were, let's say, two sets of minutes, right? One from the dissenting chapter, let's say the dissenting group, and one, let's say, were the approved group.
I get what you're saying. So two people saying they have the minutes. The prior chair would clarify that. So you would subpoena the prior chair, they'd come and testify, so that in the case of UCSD, that would be Jerry Shen, and I'd say, okay, Jerry, whose minutes are legitimate? Jerry would testify in front of everybody, being able to be questioned by both parties, which minutes were legitimate, and then we'd favor those minutes. Assuming they didn't have something specific on Jerry showing he couldn't decide that.
So Jerry did not testify then?
Nobody testified because McNally kicked the case.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is, so let's say there's two sets of minutes, right? And now we have no confirmation, let's say, from previous chair. And let's say that one is actually legitimate, one's not. And let's say the legitimate one that's supposed to go to the committee, right? That pushes off to the judicial view. Let's say pushes it off to the judicial board because, let's say, they don't want to find them legitimate. So and so when it gets to you, who you wrote the opinion on, and then you start subpoenaing people, right? And you start bringing down part of an organization upon people, let's say, who legitimately did something right, part of the process, even though there might have been disagreement within the chapter. And then when you bring that organization down, right? When you bring your part of that organization down upon, let's say, someone who is under the belief, and those who follow that person is under the belief that they did something, that they've done the right thing, and then it seems like when being subpoenaed, being punished for actually doing the correct procedure. And so when it comes, and this is just coming off the top of my head, but it would seem to me if I did to file the right paperwork, let's say, right, push the right paper, send to the right people, and then have to go through this extra process while simultaneously having a disagreement within my club, or with other that's with the dissenting faction within my club, it would seem like I would want to pull out too, right? Did you factor that in, at least before writing, while writing your opinion?
So here's what I wrote. I want to read this. Chief Justice Gorsuch summarized our opinion best in his spirited dissent in AM v. Holmes, 830 Federal 3rd District. Often enough, the law can be an ass, an idiot. Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist. And there is little we judges can do about it. for it is, or should be, empathetically our job to apply, not rewrite the law enacted by the people's representatives. The point of this is to impartially apply the procedures. Let me give you another example. I think it was
so impartially apply the procedures, but if the procedures are flawed, right? If there's something wrong, right? Fundamentally wrong with the system, and it still comes to your table.
The procedures are not wrong. I believe the procedures actually help us maintain justice. I'll give you an example. Roy Moore. I think a great injustice was served against Roy Moore when we cut off his funding without providing him an ethics trial. I don't care how obvious you believe the sex allegations were against him. The fact of the matter is everybody deserves due process at the end of the day, even if you believe it is self-evident. And the reason is because that's not justice. These are two different. And allow me to finish.
If you don't mind me saying, Kimo, these are two different things, right? When you bring up Roy Moore, right? Yeah, he might have not gone to trial, but we're also talking about a private organization that can throw money which way it wants to. A private organization,
according to Robert's rules, which is what the Republican Party runs by, has to have a due process standard. That's what Roberts says. You cannot deprive a member in a nonprofit domestic corporation their rights without giving them due process. People believe that a corporation can do whatever it wants. That's not true. You are obliged to comply by your corporate charter. And the corporate charter of our nonprofit domestic corporation requires we offer due process. That is the law. And I think the law is good. I think this is something our schools can learn from. In the case of Title IX offices, yeah, the victimization is terrible. Yeah, it kind of does punish the victim when you force them to testify. But fundamentally, it is the due process right of everybody to see their accuser and to question them.
Okay, and so more or less because in the right, you're the, so let's say in this case with UCSD, right? Let's just bring it back, right? It seems like you kind of go on the national and other things like that, or like in other let's say those examples. But let's say let's bring it back to UCSD. You're the accuser, right? Subpoenaing it to trying to bring forth information, right? Accusing.
Technically, UCSD. He's not accusing anyone, Mikey. He's hearing a case between two different parties. Who are accusing each other of different things. So, I guess the real question is, so what documents does CCR need to have in order to charter or officially recognize a chapter?
There's actually like 6 different ones. I believe I noted them in my case. Let me see if I can skip to that. There's a bunch. You have to have like bylaws, you have to have membership lists, you have to have addresses, you have to have the letter from the administration. There's a whole chartering code. You need like, I think it's 6 or 7 different documents. They're usually pretty easy because most of us already have them. We all already have bylaws. We already have membership lists. And it's pretty easy to get the phone numbers from our executive members. But you need all of that practical information to submit a charter. And if you just wait 1 second, I will find the practical materials needed, and I can easily list them off for you. They're on the website under the Credentials Committee tab. Let me pull that up. My Wi-Fi is slow right now. All right. Okay, so Code 5, the process of certifying delegates. In order to prove eligibility to be an accredited delegate, this is Rule 5.1. Submissions of delegate forms must consist of the following: proof of membership, executive officers list, copy of the club constitution, proof of official recognition, the admin letter, and then in addition to the regulations of Rules 5.1, Rules 5.2 and 5.2.1, 5.2.2 and 5.2.3 require the name, email, and phone numbers of all your executive members.
Okay.
And then the Credentials Committee also is a process of, and I think this part is flawed, of trying to certify if all your members are legit. They call they call a randomly selected number of them. So 5.4 requires the credentials committee to accredit your membership and delegate materials by calling 16% of any delegate list for any chapter with 0 to 300 members and 10% of any chapter above 300 members, and randomly call members on these lists. And the rule, if you violate a certain number of that, basically they cancel your delegates and you need to appeal to the judicial board. So if a certain number of your list is just fraud, it's just fake numbers or something, then they're going to cancel your list.
Okay. And has that check been made against the current UCSD chartered chapter?
Yes, as far as I know, they should. All the checks should be in. They might be undergoing, but yes. That main check, though, I believe if you read the credentials code for under timeline, which is Rule 6, they mostly start checking that near convention, because really, we don't decide the e-boards at the school, because only student life and leadership can do that. We decide if you have voting rights at convention or BOD, so it would have been sometime within that ballpark.
Wouldn't this be a case where you would want to trigger that kind of a check just because of the controversy?
Yeah, and I'm sure the Credentials Committee has thoroughly reviewed it. I know they had a lot of debate on it. I don't sit on the Credentials Committee, but they didn't at the specific time because the case was going to go to Judicial Board and they were going to deal with it there. And here's the problem. The calling system at the moment doesn't deal with determining, like, you don't call somebody and say, oh, are you part of the club? It just checks to make sure the numbers are real because there was a large fraud problem prior. I agree there needs to be more thorough checks, but also remember, you have to get people to volunteer to the Credentials Committee. If you call, the number of numbers in all of CCR are probably over 10,000 at the end of the day. If you take like everyone's membership list and put all their numbers on it, it's this absurd number. So, I mean, the Credentials Committee has to chug through it, and you only have like, I think there's like 6 or 7 volunteers that work with it. So they're trying to get through the process. But I agree it needs to be fixed. There's a lot of things being explored in the Constitutional Review Committee, how to fix the credentialing thing. But I think in McNally, it would have been much more effective just to bring forth J-Board, call Jerry Shen in, and have him testify. But, you know, that didn't happen, so. And Jerry seemed like he wanted to come and testify, because he said it online.
So,
but,
okay.
You know, you have to have it in the official form.
When the credentialing board makes their determination about whether or not a club is chartered, right? Okay. When they make that determination, wouldn't they have to take into account Jerry Shen regardless of whether or not McNally is still bringing a case?
No, because Jerry Shin wasn't the chair at the time. He was the prior chair.
Okay, yes, but technically CCR still needs to have those documents from him to determine if
they had the old documents from him, but they passed. You don't have to have. There's no rule right now that requires the signature from a president of the past to approve your amendments. And here's why that rule didn't pass. Let's say I had an election and I won, and the person I was running against was the incumbent, and the incumbent hates me. If I needed a signature to charter my club, he could just say, no, screw you, and just like leave, and then I'd never be able to charter my club. So that's why we don't have the signature request. That's why instead we have the petitioning system.
Okay. It just seems incredibly easy to have this exact same situation happen again.
I mean, I think that's what I was trying to bring up. It seems like, Kimo, a lot of the argument that rests, at least in your opinion, on how you decided this case was just by the fact that two people, right? 2 people did not testify at, let's say, at the hearing that you wanted to provide for the case, when it seems like there are a significant amount of flaws within the credentialing system, which you obviously stated that there are.
I think
significant
you misheard. Allow me to ask, what do you think happened with the McNally case, just so I can correct anything you're thinking about it?
I personally don't actually have much opinion on the case whatsoever. I'm just trying nobody
was
what little I know.
The McNally
I'm
hearing.
just
there was
I'm
no
trying
hearing.
to find, as you're the person who stated the opinion. I'm just trying to in the ways that you've described the opinion or how you have viewed this case. I'm trying to find. I don't know. I'm asking questions to counter that so I can have a better understanding. And so my last question, when I say it seems like within what you've said through a significant amount of this live stream so far, is that you've been relying on your opinion that two individuals, at least from what I heard, maybe more, did not come and did not testify at the hearing that you provided. Now, it seems like there are more issues, fundamental issues within the credentialing process, within the whole adjudication process. I was going to ask you, would you consider reopening the case and going through and actually fixing some of the issues that we have highlighted, and then reinvestigating the case to have a better, proper decision?
Here's the problem. The case didn't have a hearing because McNally didn't want it. So what happened in the McNally case is McNally said, I don't want to have the case, so it didn't happen. McNally is not contesting she is not officially contesting she is the legitimate chapter. She didn't want the case. I can't open a case on somebody who doesn't want to be part of it. So if McNally comes before us again and gives a legitimate reason as to why she canceled out her own case and wants to do it again, then absolutely. I don't think it's a flaw in the judicial system. The judicial system worked exactly how anybody would expect it. If I accuse you of robbing me and then we go to court and then I pull out at the last second and say, oh, we don't want to do the case anymore, then you'd be innocent. And that's what happened here. I think the flaw is
how about the okay, and then can I then assert if there is a flaw within the credential process and then the adjudication process as a whole, and then it acts the way that they say I view it as being flawed and having significant amount of issues with it and ruling against me because it is flawed, then why? I mean, I don't know, because you could say it seems like when you describe the adjudication process, it seems like it is flawless. But it seems like through the course of this conversation, we have pointed out some flaws.
I don't think any adjudication process is flawless. The world has never created one that is flawless. I think we can even agree our justice system is not flawless. I think it's very well constructed, and it's actually the official one adopted by the National Association of Parliamentarians. We actually have a stricter process of certifying than the actual Republican Party through this.
Okay.
So
I
think if we add
your
more
Association of Parliamentarians, right? You have the Association of Parliamentarians. You've said the justice system is in general, but how about CCR? Because that's what we're kind of going through in this conversation.
I mean,
I want to keep you on track.
CCR functions off the same procedures. So you know where I got the minutes from, right? The argument of why the minutes are legitimate comes from the parliamentarian system. It comes from Robert's Rules of Order. If you read my actual, have any of you read the actual McNally case in full?
No.
I would urge you to, because it's a really good piece on why due process is important. And if we read it, there are a lot of citations involved that involve traditional parliamentary procedure. The procedures were all followed. There is a deep frustration in the McNally case that McNally doesn't want to pursue her own case. The person accusing the other board of not being legitimate doesn't want it. She doesn't want to win, and that's what she says.
Yeah, why would she? So, in my opinion,
question. That is beyond me.
I mean, why would she want to go through with the case? In my opinion, what happened, and from what I've heard, basically the executive board was talking about dechartering, and then a rogue group of people that weren't, didn't agree with that, decided to commit some, essentially fraud to get this whole thing in front of the chartering committee where they used, false documents to...
Oh, yes. So you're afraid that the chair is that McNally's using this as a way to charter. I actually, in case noted, that was a very dangerous precedent, which is why we did not excuse it with prejudice. Anybody from her chapter can refile the case. It's dismissed without prejudice. So if her chapter felt strongly, a board member who has grounds to argue for this from her chapter, from the documents she submitted, could come back to us and argue that. Any CR member can submit documents, and they have the absolute right to do that. So if the worry is McNally is just trying to be obstructionist because she wants to lead, well, then her board needs to hold her responsible, and they need to refile and basically tell me, don't listen to her. We don't view her as an authority here. Show me some evidence they did that, which they have to go back to their constitution and figure out how to overrule her, and then, if necessary, censure her and show they did something there. Then yeah, they can refile it. Absolutely.
Oh, I'm not saying that they, that's what they're doing, using it to decharter, but I certainly wouldn't want to go through the process of adjudicating this whole mess. When there were clearly some problems.
As a chapter chair, you should view it important enough to go through and protect your chapter's legitimacy, because there's somebody out there using your chapter name allegedly for wrongdoing, and you need to take the step and resolve that. That might not even be through us. Yes, the state organization is one venue, but it might be through the administration. It might be through different people. In UCSD specifically, their adjudication clause is CCR. So yes, CCR has a right to adjudicate their behaviors. But if you're a chapter chair, you need to stand up for your chapter. And if you're not willing to do that, then, I don't know how I'm going to help you.
I guess hard. In my opinion, and I don't know if this would have been, justifiable based on the bylaws, but what the credentialing committee or the chartering committee should have done is withhold an opinion until the schools decided. Why did they need to rule so quickly? What if it doesn't matter until the election? That should be the rule.
A couple reasons for that. So one of them would be that CCR, by Michaela drafting a full opinion, was forced to confront it. That's a Robert's Rules problem. And here, let me actually read you. We had to deal with an exact citation Robert's Rules that dealt with that doesn't allow us to wait. It says, this comes directly from the old established parliamentary rule. If the charges are not substantiated, the officer or members are exonerated, and any authority, rights, duties, and privileges of office or membership that have been suspended are automatically restored. Robert's Rules of Order, page 664, lines 5 through 8. We're not allowed to make that arbitrary decision once the adjudication process has begun. It's not allowed.
What isn't allowed? I'm not sure.
We're not allowed to continuously suspend them after our adjudication process has resumed, just because we think there is a possibility that they might lose, because Robert's Rules of Order doesn't allow it. And I read the citation. If they're charged with something and it's not substantiated because they failed the adjudication process, i.e. the CCR Judicial Board, then they have to be restored all their rights and duties and authorities and privileges of office.
All right. I don't know. I don't quite understand how what you said means what you're saying it means.
So let me clarify something here. You want it that the Credentials Committee, or in this case the Judicial Board, just suspends them until the admins deal with it.
Yeah, that would seem the appropriate way to deal with it, considering there's obviously
That's the problem. Is CCR within itself has already taken in admin notices. Both parties have already claimed legitimacy from admins. And no party is contending that the admins are illegitimate because Michaela has withdrawn her claim. Because that's the matter, and because the claims have been adjudicated, there's no charges. So the charges aren't substantiated, and they have to be restored their rights. That's what the parliamentary rules require.
Okay.
So think about it like this. You're innocent until proven guilty.
No. I understand that from the judicial board's perspective. I'm asking about the chartering committee. Because clearly
the chartering committee was ordered by the judicial board. So page 43 of our opinion specifies that they're required to restore their rights. The reason is it's got to the judicial board, so the judicial board has to rule on it. So the judicial board gave an order to the credentialing committee that they had to restore the rights of the defendant.
So you didn't really solve it then.
I mean, they did. The solution was the original chapter, which was under Mr. Drew Olbrandt, was the legitimate chapter.
But
you restored everyone's.
No, they only restored the rights of the. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They restored the rights to the legitimate CCR chapter or the legitimate College Republican chapter at UCSD. As far as CCR is concerned.
As far as CCR is concerned.
Yes.
And maybe that's where a lot of our questioning then relies, because pointed up from, let's say, my other co-host, I think going back in the conversation, questions that I asked and questions that other co-hosts have also asked, it seems, again, when you have fundamental issues, right? I know you're focusing a lot on the judicial process, right? Because that's more or less what you had. But it seems like getting to you, right, for you to make a decision, it seems like there are a lot of issues along the way, and it seems that, at least from my personal understanding, or my personal, at least, involvement in this conversation, I only wanted to kind of, let's say, if, or at least wanted from you, if you can observe major flaws within the chartering committee when it comes to that process before it gets to you, right? And when you start making a ruling and you have flaws, which, let's say, at least in how I perceive, how at least I'm going forward with this in this conversation, not knowing much at all, only going off what has been described to me from you, that there are significant holes and significant issues in this, into this process, that it could seem to me that an illegitimate part of the chapter became the legitimate part of the chapter.
So,
and I was wondering if you could recognize that same concern.
So your problem has to do with the credentials committee, and I understand that. I actually emphasize with that. It's wording the credentials code is tough, but remember, even if the credentials code was better, all cases of contested delegates have to go to the judicial board, even if it seems obvious. Let me give you the citation on that. This is a really important quote, and this is a quote that was under such frustration from the executive board. They hated this quote because it means a lot of stuff goes to the judicial board, but it's the way the parliamentary rules have always been written. Quote, cases of contested seats in a delegation will seldom arise except in political conventions. In the rare event of a contest between two delegates or groups of delegates and a serious doubt as to which one is entitled to be seated, the committee should admit both from the list and report the fact of contest to the relevant authority. Robert's Rules of Order, page 614, lines 26 to 31.
Is the only relevant authority the judicial board?
What?
Is the only relevant authority the judicial board?
According to the Constitution, the judicial board interprets all cases where there have been violations of the governing document. Now, in theory, the CCR convention could overrule the judicial board, but that would have to be a general motion brought on the floor, and there are checks on the judicial board, but the convention is not going to meet until April. Is there any authority outside of CCR
that could possibly be that authority? That could be possibly that authority? Just a
Sorry,
question.
can you repeat that?
Oh, I was going to say, was there any authority outside of CCR, the convention, and the judicial board that could be considered possibly, figuratively, or hypothetically that authority?
The California GOP. That's what our Constitution says, or state law.
Okay, so you're saying that this could be resolved with the California GOP?
Oh yeah, if the California GOP gives us an order, we are obliged to follow by it on all requisite points. So if they give us an explicit mandate, then yes.
All right. Not that that's going to happen.
I don't think I don't think they want to get involved in this. Maybe they do. I don't know.
I don't know. It just this whole thing, it seems far too easy for unscrupulous college students who don't quite understand the problems you face when you commit fraud. It seems far too easy for them to do this and to make this whole situation happen all over again.
I mean, really, the situation wouldn't have happened if Michaela didn't send quite an obnoxious response. Allow me to read what something she said. But any wrongful actions taken by CCR since that time regarding the chartering of my club are entirely the fault of CCR, not myself. I am formally demanding that you cease and desist sending me emails like this. I never petitioned CCR for anything. So the fact that you're trying to use my name as a plaintiff in this case that I never filed is utterly ludicrous. Rather than sending me these idiotic emails, why doesn't Ariana assist me in my club in regaining possession of her social media handle? She goes on something of a rant there. And then she says, this harassment ends today or I will escalate my complaints with you to the National Association of Parliamentarians. She doesn't try to resolve this issue. There wasn't any cohesive discourse.
She did mention the one thing that should have happened and that, to my knowledge, never did. She mentioned Ariana actually, taking charge of the situation and working with both groups to find an equitable solution, which is the way that the organization should work before you ever even have a case brought before a judicial board. Did that ever happen?
I think yes. She did try to work with people, but it devolved into name-calling very fast.
Okay. That's there was a lot happens of when there's a disagreement.
Online social media banter that went into this.
Oh, okay, but still, I mean, that's usually what happens when you have disagreement. Like, people start calling each other names. You kind of go beyond that.
Right, and it was clear neither wanted to work, well, at least McNally did not want to work with Miss Rowlands.
Now, so
obviously I can't speak for Ariana and all of her efforts, but that was my understanding.
So you know that this actually occurred, this conversation?
What conversation?
Between Ariana and the two other parties.
I'm not aware of anything specific, but as I said, I didn't really inquire into the informal political situation. At the time, when I had not written the full opinion, I tried to be very detached from it.
Yeah, no,
for obvious reasons.
I understand. My issue is that this kind of stuff ever even makes it to a judicial board. I think that at best there should be a very minimal role for a judiciary in an organization like CCR, and that
I generally agree. Yes.
If we had better leadership and leadership that wanted to bridge divides, that we could have actually solved this.
I mean, I'm not sure. It seems to be two sides that are completely divided and both claim the other isn't legitimate. This isn't even like a policy disagreement or a compromise area, because what is a compromise here? It would be like one's legitimate and one's not, or one's sort of legitimate. I honestly, from a leadership standpoint, if we look at this from a political perspective, not entirely sure what you could have done on either side. Maybe they stayed less involved, but it seemed that Ariana supported the new organization, which perhaps was subject to criticism, but was her decision.
If McNally felt like there was an actual, like, if there was a neutral party that could actually, adjudicate this kind of a process, she might have stuck around. That's just a guess. I don't know her. I just know, some of the circumstances around the situation.
I think McNally might have felt socially ostracized. You have to remember, so this is strictly politically speaking, not speaking legally anymore.
Of course.
There was a ton of controversy politically over the case. You had Mr. Gates came out very strongly against Ariana. He also accused me of several things. I was obviously slightly upset about that. I never held it as part of the case because most of it came out after the case, for one. For two, I hold due process very highly. But he and Ari had a lot of fights over the specific political handling of this, and it all happened public. I'm sure you can go find Andrew posting it places. And the same happened with several others. I think he released an official letter condemning her. So that functioned to alienate. I think it was a failure of cohesiveness in the executive board that is stuck to this day, because there are elements in the executive board that do not want to work with each other. And honestly, I think there's not even ideological. I don't think there's political disagreements. In fact, honestly, with the exception of UCSD and Ryan Gardner, I agree with most college Republicans on many policy issues. There was a personal issue, which I'm not, fully aware of everybody's personal stuff. I try my best not to get involved. I do get wrapped up in it because I help deal adjudicating these cases. But I think that's the bigger question here. That's the real drama. And it's kind of sad that it's petty drama like that that's beginning to define the organization. But I think at some point the electorate needs to look and say, okay, we need to have a serious policy discussion on a future administration that's going to focus on facilitating discourse and activism that is effective, goes through the procedures, and incorporates everyone. And ultimately, as I said before, I think the state organization is too directly influential and off-season. The regions need to be empowered. So I think that's what the electorate, that's my personal view on what the electorate needs to decide. I think McNally was just a convenient issue for people to voice their personal grievances. But I honestly feel for McNally as well. It just kind of got wrapped into that, is what it seems. And to be fair as well, many members backed down after the case was adjudicated. It's not really talked about much anymore. So,
what do you mean by many members backed down? Back down from what?
There's no continuous calls from with the exception of Mr. Andrew Gates, there's no calls from the executive board to reverse the UCSD case. Now, Andrew wants us just to get rid of the entire case. He wants us to reverse it, which would be an egregious violation of due process. It would be he's angry Ariana is biased towards people. That would be an enormous bias. There's a ton of floating questions about that. I have nothing personal against Mr. Gates, obviously, but there needs to be an understanding of why the procedures are in place for that.
Okay.
All right, more questions.
Can we not hear you, Kevin? I can't hear you.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
They're going to kick me out of the library in about 10 minutes, so I'm going to head out real quick, and I'll see if I still have connection, I will be right back. All right. I'm going to go meet for a few minutes.
Okay.
Bye, Kevin. I'm going to miss you. Please come back to me, Kevin. Don't leave me. Damn you, library. Why must you do this to Kevin? It's terrible.
Mikey, do you have any more...
Just a general discourse thing. I honestly think state board members should be appearing on talks like this as often as possible, because that's how we clarify things. There needs to be like some sort of fire time chat with Kimo or something like that happens consistently. That's how things should be happening. That's how you should be talking to constituents.
I agree that greater transparency.
I think it should be cross members. My apologies.
It's okay.
My apologies, Ryan. It seems like I jumped the gun there, man. I jumped the gun.
I agree that there should be greater transparency with every organization. And, I also agree with Jordan Peterson that we should take it upon ourselves to fix the things that we can. So, Kimo, I think that means that
here's the other thing I would like to note on a final note. Sorry. There's too much transparency in CCR. Things get bogged down. There's literally thousands of pages of documents. That's why we need to have talks like these so I can clarify them. Well, all the documents are out there, but it'd be absurd to look through all of them.
Of course.
It's important to have that verbal conversation.
I feel like it's rather opaque due to how much documentation and different posts there are on both sides. I don't necessarily believe that more information is always the solution.
No, I agree. There needs to be multiple venues. I do believe everything should be published, but I should be able to come and talk to you and try to explain it. Yeah. It can be convoluted otherwise.
Well, and I'm glad that this podcast can be used as kind of a platform for that.
Absolutely.
Mikey, do you have any more questions for Kimo?
Probably my question would probably be far from, let's say, the controversies and the scandals that we've been talking about for most of the evening. But it would be, Kimo, could you envision, let's say, again, I go into the realms of hypothetics because I'm just a layman, but envision where you have, let's say, college Republican chapters that had no statewide organization that mutually worked with one another through, let's say, their own communication, in a sense, where you didn't have to have all the rules and regs and all the documentation and all of, let's say, the bureaucracy that needs, unlimited amount of transparency.
So you're saying kind of an ad hoc network.
Exactly. As the way of, let's say, as at least what we can say into the real world, into real time, or at least into this sphere, uncharted chapters. So I was wondering, can you ever envision something like that working? Why or why?
On a local level, definitely. I think it'd be less efficient for creating new chapters or having specific statewide events. And the reason is, at some point, we begin to create a bureaucracy even at club levels. And the bureaucracy eventually gets inflated. There's always a bureaucracy, and it's by the nature of rules. I can't imagine it just coming together. I could even think of it like, okay, if all of us in theory did chartered and we did then try to come together and elect somebody, we would begin arguing over how we should elect them, who should have voting rights, who's members, and then why
we need elections?
Straight back. So
if we're just local chapters, we could
where people just all work together, that functions. But I don't believe that's practical, because at the end of the day, people need a leader. People aren't just going to benignly work together. And maybe at a local level, they'll kind of do that, but at a statewide level, it'll never happen. I think that's just the nature of mankind. It's kind of the same thing I tell anarcho-communists. People aren't just going to work together in your commune. They need incentive. They need leadership. People are greedy. That's the end of the matter. They're bad. They're fallen creatures, as us Christians would call them.
But we're degenerate college students. I mean, at the end of the day, we're still college students. We kind of do this part-time. This isn't a full-time thing for most of us. I don't know. Maybe you look at it different because you're actually part of the state organization that has a position of influence and a position of power. And it's usually, I would imagine, almost a full-time thing for you. If you correct me if I'm wrong, at least in that assessment.
Oh, it is. Yeah, so I think in time devoted, people who are involved in state board leadership that want to do stuff, they give up a lot. I'm not going to lie, I've given up some. I could have a much better grade point average. I'm blessed to have what I do have, just 3.88. but I could have a much better one. I can be much nearer to a 4.0 if I can give up all my time to the state org. And I think that sacrifice is necessary in politics. People need to give up something that could have come to them for, I don't want to sound like Lenin, but, you know, the greater good or something like that. That's, at the end of the day, that's what practically
all I'm saying is that there is a respective viewpoint that I just want to just implant into your mind. Maybe the seedling won't grow, but just for something that you may want to empathize with is that the majority of the people, let's say within the organization, don't even count the ones who are not in the organization. Maybe there's reasons why some in the organization have left the organization. Is that because most of us are part-time guys? We have full-time jobs. We go to school, maybe full-time, maybe part-time. And when it comes to major controversies, or when it comes to just the day-to-day part of being over the organization, where you have mounds of paperwork and you have bureaucracy to go through and a bunch of red tape, right? It kind of seems, I would imagine, daunting on one end, frustrating on another. I was wondering if you can empathize with that, and maybe where much of this disagreement may root from is, I don't know.
I mean, the only time you ever have to fill out paperwork for CCR is once, and that's for chartering, and only the chair does that, and it's only 7 pages. The only time the documents get more lengthy is when you want to be a part of the state leadership and you want to start doing complicated things like amending the Constitution, stuff like that. And then you have your judicial cases, which also occasionally come up. But outside of that, there's not really any paperwork to CCR. CCR is rather paperworkless. I would say, I think the bigger matter is there's a great sin to all of this. I think it affects all of us, including myself to a certain perspective. The great sin of pride. And I think people, especially those who are part-time, not directly involved, they think a lot of this is kind of LARPy and it's kind of prideful. That's what a memer might call it. I don't know, LARPy. But that can be offsetting. And, at the end of the day, some of this has to be this way. The judicial board has to be that way. But when it comes to executive leadership, they need to be connectable. They need to be able to go out to the people as often as possible and connect to them. They got to be on every chat they can. They got to talk. So that's what I think is going to help bring it back. It's going to be leadership that is going to actively be on calls like this. It's going to be stuff like that. That's what's going to reunite people. It's the tough, dirty work.
Oh. I don't know. Ryan, you got anything?
No. I think
I got about 4.5 hours before
I'll
I go to work.
I'll answer anything, but well.
No, don't worry about me. Do not worry about me, my good man.
Looks like Kevin's back with us.
Hey, Kevin.
I think we were just kind of wrapping it up.
School could take you away from me forever.
No.
Yes.
Never take me alive.
Live free or die.
Would you like to ask me any more questions, Kevin?
Yeah, I do have one question, or I might have a few. The one on the top of my head right now is, we talked about the legal help that CCR provides to the chapters. So I know you have Sean Steele and I think Bill Becker on your retainer.
Yes.
What? Okay, it's not like they are committed to CCR. They're not exclusively working for you. They would help in uncharted chapter if they needed legal help, and they would do so for free. I would think so.
So to clarify that, for one, you have to remember in the specific situation of Fullerton, Fullerton is a very well put together chapter. They've been around a while, they have connections. The majority of chapters aren't like that. They need help, they need those connections. That's one thing the state org provides. People outside of Southern region especially have that problem. We helped out UCM against the student government. We helped out a number of different colleges outside of the South where those connections are not as apparent. So I would say for the South, in our particular context, we are very blessed. So it helps us out a little. But other clubs and schools find it very beneficial. So depends on the context. I would say we also have the legitimacy of the state party. So when these things start getting expensive, that's where we really start footing the bill. But, for demand letters, the opening things, really when trying to scare the admins, which usually works, yeah, you can get their assistance. And I would I would help you in any way in doing that. Because ultimately we're all here for the same cause, the conservative cause. So ultimately I'd say, yeah, you can access that. And we're here to help.
Okay. This might open a whole new can of worms, but the idea that Fullerton was threatened with a lawsuit for using a name, I think we had some disagreements on whether that actually happened or who was actually doing the threatening.
Here's the problem. I don't know every single person your chapter has ever talked to. I'm sure, as I said before, some random Joe on the super pro CCR was like, oh yeah, Fullerton's gonna get sued and destroyed. I don't know. Maybe they said that. I definitely did not say that. What I did insinuate was that they would not receive direct state party help, which is just according to the bylaws because of chartering requirements. Same with RFW stuff, which is a whole nother parliamentary procedure mess. I don't believe anybody threatened to sue them. And you have to remember, the College Republican name is protected, but Fullerton's not using it. It's Fullerton Republicans. They have every right to do that. It more has to do with if you go out in public and say, on behalf of the College Republicans, we're doing this, then you might be in some trouble. But there's good reason for that. We got to protect the name to some certain extent. But as long as you're not pretending to be us, then yeah, go do your own thing. In fact, I encourage it. You guys are doing
who
good
is
work.
we in this scenario,
but
Kimo?
As I said,
you said we've got to protect it. You've said we've got to protect the name. Who's that we in this scenario?
College Republicans. I would even say as much as the CRNC. It just depends in what context you're using it. CCR, definitely. Well, I would say the Republican Party. Depends how serious it is.
Well, who actually owns it?
Sorry, continue.
Do you know who actually owns the what would that be?
Our corporate charter gives us access to the name California College Republicans.
Okay.
So if you're using the name California College Republicans, that's us.
Of course.
And that's recognized by Padilla and the Secretary of State.
Of course. But that's not what would be at claim. It would be the use of College Republican. So if you're talking about a trademark issue, the CRNC has the name College Republicans. But at the same time, we definitely have a right to the corporate ownership of it because our corporation charter has College Republicans as our shortened title. Honestly, even if you went out there and had College Republicans as your name, it would definitely not be procedurally in order, but nobody's going to do anything against you unless you start doing crazy stuff. If you start posting Hitler salutes and stuff, then yeah, the state organization is probably going to interfere to protect their name. But okay. I mean, we have limited resources. Why would we spend it against you if we can spend it against the Democrats? But yeah, obviously we're not going to support that. But our corporate charter gives us access to the name. So yes. Okay.
Obviously, this is a disclosure for everybody on this chat. I'm not an attorney, so I cannot give legal advice for any court, nor can anybody in this chat. So this is obviously my opinion.
Of course. And thank you for making that clarification.
Yeah.
Did you have anything to follow up? We can't hear you.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry. So as far as other dechartered chapters who are using the College Republican name, no legal action will be taken against them unless they are using it in some silly way, right?
He can't say that, with certainty, because he's not the one that would take the legal action.
But that is your opinion. That's what you foresee, right?
I mean, I think there's only one other dechartered chapter, which would be Channel Islands, and I don't believe they use the name College Republicans.
Okay.
So, yeah, I don't foresee it being a problem. as I said, maybe, but that's contextual, and that'd be up to the state org. That I can't be involved in that. Well, maybe I would be involved in that. I don't know. But I don't see it in the near future. As I said, though, no promises there. Don't cite me on that.
Okay.
As for Fullerton specifically, because I think that's what the question was about, I don't recall that.
Okay. We also had some disagreements about a specific phone call that was made toward one of the Fullerton Republicans on whether during that phone call a lawsuit was threatened. As far as I know, I've spoken to the person who was called, and he concurs that indeed a lawsuit was mentioned if we did not recharter, or if we went through with the decharter, which we eventually did.
I mean, honestly, it's that entire scandal is beginning to sound like a game of telephone to me, because certain people are saying one thing, certain people are saying another thing. I mean, I can't comment on it. I was never in that phone call, so I'd just be getting my sources from secondhand. So it just comes down to, do you trust somebody? I don't think it's a useful source of discourse, because I'm not going to get... The problem with a lot of CCR gossip, too, is it relies off, you know, he said she did this, and she said he did this, and it's just not worthwhile getting into the weeds there. I've been told multiple times nothing like that happened. I believe the individual who stated it that nothing happened. There doesn't seem to be anything from that. Generally, people seem to be fine on it. So, I mean, I don't know how to disagree with you there. Yeah, I disagree with you, but neither of us can really prove it. It's a non-falsifiable question. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I understand.
But maybe it's not possible. Oh, sorry.
When I was discussing that with you, you seemed to have some certainty behind that it did not happen.
I am rather personally certain that I don't think it happened, or at least it might have been misconstrued. There might have been a call, but I believe it was misconstrued, because I don't know why somebody would represent us when I'm mostly the one who deals with stuff, especially in that nature. But, you know, I don't know what happened. It's a non-falsifiable question. So I don't think it happened. I think it was misconstrued. That's my personal take.
Okay, fair enough. Mikey, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was going to ask that. I was going to say, I was going to at least interject that it could be non-falsifiable, but could you envision it being possible?
I mean, possible, yes, but probable, no.
Okay, I was wondering
I can envision a lot of things being possible.
Again, it's non-falsifiable, but... And we've kind of already considered that. I don't believe it's probable. But,
yes. So the reason it's not probable is because I issued a parliamentary memo on exactly how to deal with the Fullerton issue, and assuming everybody read my paperwork, which they should have, then our position should have been very clear on it.
Well, you're assuming that other people within the state organization that represents leadership that you are part of should have read your paper. Now, maybe they should have, but if they didn't, and start throwing, and let's say it's possible that they didn't read your paperwork, and let's say it's possible that, you know, they are throwing out accusations, right? I don't know where would then you stand on the certain issue.
Well, I guess the question I would ask... Sorry.
So my opinion has been approved by the executive board. So if there's somebody making erroneous claims, then they're just wrong, I guess, would be the answer. I don't know how to phrase that any differently. They're misrepresenting the org, and if there was proof they did that, then they should be censured immediately. But
how would that proof get presented, or what process would an outside organization have to make that claim?
Honestly, it depends, because people who are Republicans registered have different rights under the Constitution than non-Republicans. I would even say like CSUF members could possibly argue for grounds under the judicial board, depending what it was. It would just depend on the context. But if it was people who were members that were bringing the complaint, then definitely. Otherwise, it's considered an external issue, and the executive board has to deal with it, because the judicial board only deals with internal stuff. So I guess the executive board would have to discipline the member. That's the only way I could think.
All right.
Because they would just have acted inappropriately if that was the case.
Kimo, let me ask you, what do you think about how CCR has been rebranded and how they are marketing themselves through social media and stuff like that?
So there's a couple different crowds CCR needs to target. You know, you got to have your boomers, right? Because they're the ones who provide the money. They're the ones who do the donations. I think great towards them so far. Students, I honestly think that among students, there's no problem in the marketing and branding. I think the majority of students liked it. I think the real drama came in with people's petty drama, and that began to translate to disputes over marketing policy. But I generally think the marketing has been solvent. Dylan Martin, I've commended his work on how much he's just put into this organization for marketing. We have a great image, especially amongst like the boomers, which is important. And we have a pretty good image, I would think, among students. We've given out some pretty good supplies. I've heard the main objection is we look too much like Antifa, but red and black have always been a very common color political movements. I don't think the left has a monopoly on it. I think it's silly relating it to Nazism. We don't look like Nazis at all. I think those are the main complaints. I know UCSD made those complaints. So I would generally say the marketing is good. The other thing I think I want us to consider is that to change the marketing at this point is not only difficult, it would be expensive, but it would be bad for the branding of the org, because we should stick with the same branding for a good 5 to 10 years. So I think 5 years from now, we should definitely change it. But as of right now, I think it's appropriate, it's functional, it's doing its job.
Okay. There were a few Facebook posts that sort of irked me. There was one where the college Republicans had been involved in several deployments, and the candidates that you deployed for eventually performed well in their respective elections. And then in the post, it seemed like you were taking credit for them doing well in the elections. At least the way the post was worded, it seemed like
the college
CCR
Republicans
was solely responsible for getting those people elected.
Anyone with common sense would know that they're not fully responsible. And I don't think the college Republicans were ever insinuating that. They were insinuating that they helped out a lot. I think a lot of our members in general do help out, especially outside of official deployments. They do it as their jobs. They go and walk for them. And a lot of stuff, especially right now with that, has to do with getting the youth voice to the table. The point of the marketing there isn't for students, because the students know what we're doing. The point of marketing there is for the boomers, because the people up in the state party need to see that college students are doing something and should have a seat at the table. That's what that stuff is really for.
Okay, I just disagreed with how that post was worded. I understand the message that was intended, but it certainly did not come off that way.
All right, that's understandable.
Okay.
I guess one of the questions I forgot to ask you, now's a good time. What exactly was the reason for deciding to punish chapters that have dechartered? I'm not exactly sure what the wording of it was, but I believe that there is some kind of punishment to chapters that decharter.
So the problem with that, the context of it, wasn't with the chartering itself. It was people who were worried, including myself, that the chartering was more just going to be used as a political tool, like a statement, and the second you were able to get something from the state org, you would recharter. That was the fear. So it wasn't directly dechartering. It was people who would decharter, threaten the state org like, oh, we want $500 in this stipend fund. Or they would do something like, oh, we want this person on the state board. And then they would recharter. I think that was the concern.
Okay.
And literally the only thing that has been instituted against that is if they do that, then they can't immediately come back. There's a wait period.
Okay. I just... It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because I feel like you would want to get schools back in the fold as quickly as possible, and this would be a barrier to that.
I generally agree with that, which is why there's a very strict definition in the bylaws on how that functions. And it more has to do with at the end of the day, if people do think there was some sort of malicious intent and somebody was to file a case against the chapter, it'd have to go to the judicial board to determine if they explicitly disassociated. Now, if you read McNally case, I go into like how that functions and stuff. But there's a very thorough standard in how it functions to determine if they met all the criteria for the waiting time. I think I do agree you want them back in the fold, but you also need to prevent chapters from arguing, basically being terrorists and keeping a gun pointed at their own head so that they can get something, which is actually a problem happening in the state organization right now. You have individuals who claim that we need to incorporate more moderates, or, they're just going to leave. And I think if the electorate decides that, that's fine. But I think that's a reprehensible policy as something that should be forced upon us. Moderates should be able to argue for their ideology on a merit platform. They should not be able to just point a gun at their head and say, oh, we're going to decharter because we don't agree with your policy platform.
So, but other than an optics issue, what is the problem with a club dechartering?
Optically?
Other than optically.
I mean,
because obviously it doesn't look good for the organization that a club's dechartering. But other than that, is the organization even really affected all that much by a club dechartering?
Depends on the manner they decharter. If they just leave, then no. But most dechartering is met with some sort of assertive political statement that if they do A and, give something to a club, or clubs that have threatened to decharter, because there have been plenty that have threatened and they haven't gone through with it, that they would get some sort of compensation and then wouldn't decharter. I think that's damaging, because then you suddenly have this debate in the organization of whether we want to provide that compensation. So that's always debate that happens.
So has there been an instance where a club threatened to decharter and then they use that to get special treatment?
So far, no, but it has been threatened. Okay. But I would say no, and I mean, dechartering is rare. Only 2 schools have dechartered.
I'm aware that it is very rare to do it in the way that Cal State Fullerton and Channel Islands did. So I guess what I'm getting at is it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of a reason to have this punishment when it hasn't occurred yet that a club has gotten special treatment, and it seems like the current system precludes them from being able to get any, because it just doesn't make sense.
Oh yeah, I think the current system handles it well, and I don't think there are any further...
I meant the previous system, not the system in which there's punishment for chapters.
I mean, I don't even really view it as punishment. The quote-unquote punishment is more of a waiting period of them being able to run for top CCR office. That's really all it is. It doesn't affect them getting chapter boxes. It doesn't affect them getting any funding appropriations. It's just running for upper office, so people don't use it as a political tool, which is being used right now.
Do they get votes at the convention?
I do not believe that they get vote. Depends on the time frame, but likely in the context that it's being used, that the provision is concerned with, they probably wouldn't get votes.
Okay, so it seems that the most relevant thing that you can do as a club in the organization is vote, and you're taking that away from them. And they,
for a short period of time, if it falls within the just because we're talking about this so much, let me pull up the actual bylaw provision, because it's kind of a complicated one. It's not just like, oh, if you leave the state org, you have a waiting period. There's specific legal standard. Okay. So here's what the actual thing says. No prior chapter of the California College Republicans that is found by the Judicial Board to have the charter through explicit disassociation upon reentry, readmission, or rechartership into the organization shall be permitted to vote in the general session of convention or to run for elected office for the period of 1 year. Now, remember, look at some of the wording here. Found by the Judicial Board. That means somebody actually has to file an affirmative case against you, arguing that you met the standards of explicit disassociation. And that you're, for one, not just a new chapter that came, because it has to be re-entry, so it has to be the same chapter. Oftentimes, the way to prove that would be the same leadership. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into finding you being guilty of this provision and thus getting barred.
Okay, so I guess my question would be, and I am not, saying that this is going to happen, but hypothetically, if Cal State Fullerton right this moment wanted to come back into CCR, would they be subject to that what we just discussed?
Not unless somebody filed a Judicial Board case against them alleging they had explicitly disassociated and that Brooke was just a continuation of Amanda's policies.
Okay.
Now, the prior article that was published might infer that, but at the same time, Brooke didn't necessarily say she just explicitly disassociated. So, I mean, they would have to go through the process proving Fullerton did all those things. But if they just re-entered right now, then yeah, they'd have all their same membership statuses.
Okay.
So, what would be the timeline? Yeah. So, as you said, it would, again, let's just continue this hypothetical conversation. So, what would be the timeline for Brooke not to be a part, hypothetically, of the previous administration's policies, and who is to determine that?
Well, the last question, who determines that? That's the Judicial Board. It's always the Judicial Board who determines procedural stuff or questions of fact. What the time frame would be, honestly, that's up to the Judicial Board to decide, and I can't speak for them. Yes, I'm a member on it, but there's other justices on it who have very specific
But you're the lead justice,
requirements.
Am I correct?
Correct, yes. I would say my parliamentary opinion for Brooke, I would need to show that to be a new chapter and not a continuation of a prior, she'd probably have to have a new constitution. I would need to review any evidence, because obviously there'd have to be somebody charging her, so they would need to provide evidence she explicitly disassociated, and then I'd need to go back into McNally and check if she met the standard. There's a couple standards they have to meet to prove Brooke intended explicit disassociation, and then she's part of the same group which had intended to explicitly disassociate.
And nevertheless, it is between you and how many justices, if you don't mind me asking?
2 right now. There should be 7 in total, but...
So there's only 3.
What happened to the others, or were there never 7?
They didn't get through the nomination, so it is very difficult to get on the Judicial Board. We are publishing a new app soon because the other people got denied, and we're going to allow people to come back in again because we need more candidates to try to approve, because there's not enough people on the Judicial Board right now. So there's only 3 right now. Me, Matt Vitelli and Madison Noble Marks. We are the three. Marks Noble are the three justices. We do want to add more people, though. We are working on that, but it's a very long process because not only do you have to have an app, and it's like a complicated legal question they have to answer, but then the chair has to sort through all of them with her staff to sign somebody, and then she has to go toward a board of the regional vice chairs and have them approve it by a majority of the regional vice chairs, not even a majority of the board. So getting everybody to turn up to a single meeting and having the hearing and the vote, and then likely the next hearing is going to be, televised to CCR, so, now it becomes political too. It'll become like a Kavanaugh hearing at some point, so lengthy system. But I think it gets away from the question, which is about Fullerton.
Well, yes, because when, if you don't mind me, so there's three justices, and let's say, and I'm not here to defame anyone's character here, but let's say two of the justices, including yourself, find that no matter how much evidence is put before to say that if CSUF Republicans were to recharter again was possible, right?
Yes.
So it would be to the point. So what I'm saying is that there could still be a majority, no matter how much evidence. So is there a standard on how much evidence? Because it's still at the end of the day, all the standards that you've laid out, quite possibly still can be, in my mind, not enough evidence.
To
this question, because nevertheless, it's up to your
the judicial process is far from complete. There hasn't been any case law adjudicating what is enough evidence to prove explicit dissociation. Now, there's standards of what explicit dissociation is. The evidentiary standard, because there hasn't been a fact hearing yet, hasn't been established by official case law, and it's too specific a question for parliamentary procedure to address. So, yes, there could be a great perversion of justice, potentially. I don't disagree there. And at that point, convention needs to overrule the judicial board. That's the solvency, convention. Because nobody else... Convention, or you get a petition signed. I think the Constitution says, if you get 2/3 of every single college Republican chapter to agree with you, then you can remove a justice. But that'll never happen. So, convention needs to overrule.
Convention. Now, and maybe because we're on this hypothetical question, and let's say for me to stem it back from the previous conversation that we have, now we don't have to retread ground here, but could you say that if there was going to be an overruling of certain other decisions that we've discussed and may not have discussed in the total length and detail that it should have been required, and say it does have to go to convention, then, and let's say if the convention sides, all will side, or it has been viewed to side with the ruling and with the leadership that is standing, then what's the point of going through the system? Through the whole adjudication process.
You need it because, the convention can always overthrow the judicial process. But getting that vote in convention is not easy. Let me check the Constitution on the exact, but there's a law. It is very tough to get that vote in convention to overrule the judicial board. Just look up my... All right, let's see here. The way they go about doing it is removing judicial board members, the convention, and then after you remove the judicial board, you would, because there's nobody in place to make procedural opinions, the chair would make a procedural opinion. If the chair was wrong, you'd point of order the chair, and then you'd vote on the point of order because you'd appeal the point of order, and then you can admit everybody by amending the credentials list. It's tough, but that's why the judicial board needs to be of high esteem when selecting candidates. The U.S. Constitution system is really no different. Because theoretically, the Supreme Court could just overthrow the election cycle. They could just say it was an illegitimate election and somebody else was elected. They could do that. It would be a very scary day for our justice system, but it's possible. And the chance for great perversion is always out there. And at that time, they need to be overthrown if that great perversion does actually happen.
Okay. Got something, Kevin?
I'm all out for tonight.
Okay. Because...
Where did Ryan go?
I don't know. Oh, there he is. He's reappeared. Orion has appeared in the wilderness.
Salutations.
Sorry. What's up?
Any last questions for Kimo?
Yeah, I'm good.
Oh no, I'm good. I think we discussed all the topics that I wanted to touch on.
Think so.
All right.
So I'm good.
All right. Thank you very much, Kimo.
Thank you.
Yep.
No problem. Thank you so much for inviting me to your show.
Wonderful. Hope you have a good evening.
Yep. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Or good morning. Which is it is. All right. Well,
so it seems like we have some other CCR related people who would like to get their word into.
Okay.
So do you guys think we should have them on at some time in the future?
I've got about another half hour if they wanted to come on and say something real quick now. I don't know about you guys.
Okay.
Sure.
If they want,
why not? But
whoever emailed me, if you want to send me a Skype account or a phone number I can call.
Yeah. So while we are waiting for, let's say, another member to get their word in, I'm just gonna go through the chat, just because the chat is where you'll find all of the good people. Now, instead of the CCR stuff, blah 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 blah, how to go through. Some person call me the realist. Yes, I am very real, by the way. All of us co-hosts are real. I might be the realist. I don't know. Maybe that's a debate to come into the future. Another said, who was the other man? Oh, one said that the bottom left, that would be you, Kevin, should talk more because you might have something enlightening to say. He is the most enlightened out of the three of us. So, and that's why he doesn't talk so much.
He certainly is farther down the path than either of us.
Than either of us.
In many ways.
In many ways. In many ways. And I don't know if I will ever tread on the same stones as he. So, between those two, yeah, I think we're set. And then they said that another individual said that our email may or may not work at times.
It does work. We did receive the emails. It was a pretty big document that I was trying to go through while still listening to Kimo. If, like I said, if either one of them are still listening, if they want to come on and explain their side and what that email meant, that's more than fine with me.
Cool. I mean, I'm already up, so a little less sleep just doesn't hurt me at this point. So.
We can also do another live stream with them as well. I'd love to hear the other side.
I would too. And the one thing is, probably out of the three, I know least about this whole thing. So I tried to at least organize my thoughts and to present what little I know respectfully to the content, and to give both sides the justice that one or may not deserve. So that's just me. I could be horribly wrong. Maybe someone will come on the next 5 minutes and scream at me. Let's see. So, any takers?
No, it looks like it's pretty late. So
yeah,
let's wrap it up, and we'll have another live stream with some different points of view.
That sounds good. I think this is something to really unpack and to unravel. Now, maybe this is me personally, but Kimo, it takes a lot to unpack. I might need like a 7-zip or an unzip program to just unpack all the folders.
Yeah, he did have to speak in a very legalistic way, and it definitely serves to obfuscate some things from a certain perspective.
Yeah. So, but if no one's going to come on here in the next minute or so, then I think I'll be ready to turn in.
Yeah, I think 2 hours and 15 minutes is a pretty good spot to end it.
I think so.
Thank you guys. A wonderful conversation. I know that some people were calling for us to be a little bit harder on Kimo. I really just wanted to let him share his side of the story, and kind of ask him some questions that I thought were pertinent, and I felt like we all did a pretty good job of respecting him, because he did he did come on the show. So,
well, and when it comes to so much of this controversy, he does have the final say, in a sense, or he has the majority opinion, it seems like. So it's very interesting to hear why, in a certain way, where he's coming from and where he's stemming from.
Yeah.
Now, it seems like, in my opinion, and maybe this will be brought forth into the ether in further conversations, I hope, but it seems like much of what I was trying to ask, it seems like he went around, but but maybe that's just him. Maybe he can't. I don't know, but that's all right. No, it was a good guest, and very happy to have at least participate in the conversation. So.
Yeah, it looks like we just got a question about punishing. So there's provisions there were changes to CCR bylaws or something to that effect, that state that a club that is found to have dechartered is not allowed to vote for a year and cannot have any of their members run for state positions. So I'm not sure if that was facetious, but that answers the question that was just asked. But yeah, we would love to discuss that with whoever else wants to come on and give a different side and a different opinion.
I'm down to hear the other side. So
obviously we have a bit of a different side and a completely different on a completely different issue. So, all right, guys. Thank you for listening. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great night's sleep. I'm gonna get one.
Night sleep? You mean early morning sleep?
Tell them where to follow us.
Oh yeah, so you can follow us here on our YouTube, Now Granted. You can find us at nowgranted.com. Also Now Granted on Facebook, and Now Granted Podcast on Instagram.
So, please like and subscribe.
Yes, for more riveting content like this. All right, I'm going to end it right now.